Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. Hello, greetings from Abuja, Nigeria. My name is Chioma Agwebo, and I lead a team at Techher NG to create opportunities for women to embrace technology and deploy towards societal issues. I'm also very privileged to be one of the 21-member half-year Initiate Digital Rights in Society working group process on algorithmic governance issues across the Global South. This process is incubated by the Paris Peace Forum, and it explores AI regulation and pathways towards an international Bill of Rights, an international digital Bill of Rights, and has informed the questions and topics that we'll be exploring in this session today. Our white paper on this topic will be released to policymakers and civil society stakeholders in early 2022, so please look out for that. Now, as a teaser, as we get into this session, have you ever wondered who benefits from the current patterns of digitization across the Global South? Who gains from the deployment of advanced algorithmic systems across critical areas of the economy and governance? How can artificial intelligence and other algorithmic platforms be most effectively and ethically deployed to solve problems of human and economic development without widening existing inequalities? These questions are the thrust for our conversation today. Don't forget, the hashtag to use during this session and throughout the forum are Paris Peace Forum 2021 and Solutions for Peace. We're hoping for an interactive conversation, so please keep your thoughts and questions to hand, and we will get to them at some point during the session, during this hour that we have together. All right? We have a truly distinguished panel today, and it is my pleasure to introduce Gabriela Ramos, Assistant Director General at UNESCO, Alice Munia, Director African Radi, Mozilla Corporation, Malavika Jaharam, Executive Director, Digital Asia Hub, and Nnenna Nwakama, Chief Web Advocate, World Wide Web Foundation. You're welcome. As we proceed, let's start with Gabriela Ramos, Assistant Director General for the Social and Human Sciences of UNESCO. She's also a member of the board of Paris Peace Forum. Let's talk about the UNESCO Ethical Impact Assessment for AI, which is an exciting piece of work that aims to support UNESCO member states in implementing the recommendation on the ethics of AI and ensuring the ethical design, development, and use of AI through the development of an ethical impact assessment. Would you like to share with us some of the things that you're finding out or some of the high points of this ethical assessment? Okay, I think while we wait for her to join us, I'll just move to the other members of the panel and then we can get back to her when she gets here. So I'm going to go to Malavika. Now, we've come a long way from the early days of digital, right? From dial-up internet to artificial intelligence, now to machine learning that's going on today. How would you describe the evolution of challenges within technology arbitration from the time when you first taught, when you taught your first, information technology and law course in India as the first person ever to do so in the entire country? How would you describe the evolution?
Thank you so much. When I started teaching this subject, I would tell people that I worked on IT law, and everyone thought I meant income tax, and they would ask me how to depreciate their car within the financial year. No one thought it referred to information technology. So I think just in terms of vocabulary and understanding, we've come a long way. I think one of the really, really big changes that I've seen is the interdisciplinarity and the intersectional work that's being done when it comes to governance. I think people thought that digital rights was in a very narrow silo by itself. It involved intellectual property. It involved other kinds of issues relating to hate speech, content moderation. And I think people didn't really understand the extent to which inequality, structural inequality, decoloniality, and other kinds of issues related to social justice and inequity played a really massive role in how we govern systems. I think when we see the algorithmification of the welfare state, for example, which is something that the paper by the working group really goes into, I think we really understand the nuance and the complexity with which the proliferation of digital systems the extent of public-private partnerships when it comes to governance. All of these trends have had really massive impacts in the question of who gets to benefit from technology, who gets left out, who gets excluded, whose interests and claims are privileged within technical systems. And I think finally, the thing that I've seen as a massive shift is recognizing that these are socio-technical systems. They're not just technical systems run by, Silicon Valley technologists. They are very much integrated into lived experiences of people. There are more ideas around cooperative, collaborative ways of looking at how these are owned. And I think there's a growing need to understand that you can't have systems built in a silo by people who look the same and then export them to other parts of the world where the context doesn't work, the cultural norms don't work. So I think in all of those respects, the idea of governance has really, really changed since I first taught this in, 1997.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Malavika. I'm going to come to you, Alice, and the brilliant work you do at the Mozilla Foundation, right? To just ensure inclusion and ensure that the innovation doesn't leave anyone behind. My question is, what economic and social divides must be navigated as we formulate regulatory approaches that account for the interests and histories of countries across the global South?
Thank you very much, and I'm really pleased to be here. So for those who don't know, Mozilla is a global community with a mission to promote openness, innovation, and opportunity on the web. We are globally known for our popular web browser, Firefox, and our mission is to ensure that the internet is a global resource that is open and accessible to all. We also really believe, in an internet that puts people first, where individuals can shape their own experiences and are also empowered, safe, and independent. And with that, we build products that put people back in control of their connected lives. And we also, advocate for public policies that improve the health of the internet, and by creating and promoting interoperable open standards that enable innovation and also advance the web. So now when Mozilla was started in 1998, the growth of the web was defining where computing was going, and we were focused on web standards and building a browser. But I think if you look at today with the digital society that we live in, it is defined by vast troves of data and sophisticated algorithms and omnipresent sensors and devices. So, we are calling it the era of AI, but then we keep asking the questions, does the way this technology works promote human agency, or am I in control of what happens?
My session has started. I'm in the middle of the session.
To my data. Is like, how do we keep the web open and free? So the current era of computing and the way it shapes consumer internet technology has really high stakes. And given that the power and pervasiveness of these technologies, the question of whether AI supports, empowers, or exploits and includes will continue to have a huge impact on the direction that our societies head in the coming decade. So it's very easy for us to head in the wrong direction, as we rush to build data collection and automation into nearly everything. And we've already seen the potential of AI to reinforce long-standing biases or to point us towards really dangerous content. And, we believe that there's really little transparency or accountability when AI systems spread, for example, misinformation or misidentifies a face. And also, as people, we rarely have agency over what happens with our data or the automated decisions that it drives. So, so as Mozilla, what we've done, we've identified 8 challenges that the world is facing when it comes to AI. And these are things like bias, abuse of privacy, the lack of transparency, concerns around security and the centralization of power in the hands of, big tech companies. And I think, as my previous speaker colleague said, really, you cannot understand the role of technology, the role that technology is going to play in a society, if you really do not understand the society in question. If some of this technology is being created by a few people who all look alike, and we knowing that algorithms are opinions that are embedded in code, there's a lot at stake, especially, when it comes to the monopoly and centralization, data privacy and the governance of that, bias and discrimination, the issue of accountability and transparency, and even exploitation of workers and the environment to a certain degree. So there's that, all of these challenges coming up. And I think it's so important. Mozilla has been working with governments and with civil society and others to try and come up with, perhaps regulatory policy frameworks that can perhaps govern this space to ensure that this new emerging technology are not exploitative and rather are empowering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was really interesting to listen to the work that you are doing, and just very pleased to announce that the Assistant Director General of UNESCO, Gabriela Ramos, is now with us. Thank you so much for joining. I was actually going to ask, my first question was actually to you, talking about UNESCO's ethical impact assessment for AI, and then we'll come back to some of the high points from what you said, Alice. So this ethical impact assessments, like I said earlier, exciting piece of work that it tries to ensure equality, right, across UNESCO member states, and then ended up producing this ethical impact assessment. And so my question was, what are some of the high points that have come out from this assessment? What are some things we need to be mindful of? What are some tensions we should be mindful of?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I was trying to connect, and then of course the technologies are always playing tricks on us. The ethical impact assessment is a tool that we need to develop, and I'm so pleased that I'm presenting it here, and that was chosen by the Paris-based Forum as one of the most important innovations in this domain, because it's linked to the recommendations on the ethics of artificial intelligence that UNESCO will approve. Hopefully, members will approve next Tuesday. So watch this space. And the ethical impact assessment is the tool that tries to operationalize the values and the principles that the recommendation is developing. The values is exactly as was mentioned by the previous speaker, is about protecting human rights, human dignity, is about inclusion, is about diversity, is about fairness, is about peaceful coexistence, is about non-violence, no harm. So those values need to be developed in terms of principles that we all know, that is transparency, accountability, the rule of law, the redressal mechanisms when you are harmed. But we need to transform that into a tool that can be used by AI developers or users, and that can really confirm whether the AI technologies are delivering the outcomes that we want. Because we always talk about AI as if it is an exogenous technology that falls from the sky. It's not. It's man-made, and I have to say man-made, because it's 85% of AI developments are done by male-only teams. And it's made usually by few companies and few countries, usually the more advanced. And therefore, this issue of ensuring there are no bias, or that the stereotypes that many times reach the development of the systems are not do not appear in these constructions. But the fact is that it happens. And therefore, what we need to do, as we cannot codify everything, of course, regulatory frameworks that protect people, that protect the privacy, that protect if there are outcomes that are harmful. But at the same time, it's very dynamic, it's everywhere, is informing many decisions that are being taken in the public and the private sector. And therefore, for us to have the ethical impact assessment as a tool that everybody can use in a form of questions, in a form of thinking, the ethical thinking, what am I using this for? Is my data sets complete? It is representative? Is my team developing the AI diverse enough that I will avoid just reproducing the same way of thinking? Is it including people from the global south? All these questions in terms of how to protect people in the digital space will be introduced in the ethical impact assessment. And we hope that this will become, and this is our ambition, that it will become as when we started organizing the environmental impact assessments. You remember that the environmental impact assessments were born 30 years ago, and they have been evolving and improving, but it was just a very important call to all the developers to say it has to be ethical, it has to be environmental friendly, it has to be gender sensitive, it has to be inclusive. And this is what we're aiming for.
All right, thank you very much, Gabriela. And I think you mentioned something about technology oftentimes being male-led. I'm very excited that this panel is all women. That's always a brilliant thing to see. Thank you so much for that response. I'm going to go to Nena now, who is known as Nena from the internet, right? And your voice has been recognized for policy changes for development through open technology. You're very big on opening the web, very big on inclusion, on access for all, and all of those things. Now, in the spirit of inclusion and leaning on something Alice said about ensuring people take charge of their use of all things digital and, as it were, chart a path for themselves, what are promising approaches? How can we ensure, I beg your pardon, that policy-making discussions surrounding digital platforms and AI do not unnecessarily stratify the world into, two halves, norms producers and norms consumers?
Thank you, Chama, for having me. Bonjour, hello, salam alaikum to everyone. Those in Paris, those joining online. My name is Nena. I come from the internet. I'm the chief web advocate at the World Wide Web Foundation, which is that organization co-created by Sir Tim Berners-Lee and his wife. That is very important. The Web Foundation was created by a couple, a male and a female. And what I want to take us back before we go into norms and consumers and creators is that if we take a step back and look at the first article of the Human Rights Declaration, it says all humans are born free and equal in rights and dignity. That is very important in today's world. How would you put that? I would say all humans are born digitally free and equal in rights and in dignity. Now, I want to come back to your question. We have to understand the reason, the psychology, the ideology behind the creation of the World Wide Web, what we call the fathers of the internet and the web. 2 words. And if you forget everything I say today, please remember this too. For everyone, that is the vision of the digital world, that it should be for everyone. The second vision is that it should be for good. So for everyone and for good. For everyone means that everyone should be able to access, everyone should be able to use, everyone should be able to benefit, everyone should be able to contribute, and everyone should be able to use this technology to develop themselves. And the good, like we're speaking today, COP is still going on, that technology should serve to enhance humanity, that technology should serve to bridge the divide, that technology should serve to address injustices. Now look at the panel we're in. It says global north, global south. Already we have kind of put in a divide between the north and the south. And Madam Moderator, let me come back again and say all humans are born digitally free and digitally equal. I don't think that the one in Paris has more digital rights or more dignity than I in Abidjan do. So it is really very important that as a development, as a peace forum, or as a global corporation, digitally connected community, we take that into consideration. What should we be doing? I will say 2 things. The first thing we want to do is to recognize that connectivity is a right. Because I don't know how any human being in 2021 after this pandemic or during this pandemic can live a dignified, developed life without connectivity. And so my first call in Paris Peace Forum 2021 is that we please go ahead and adopt connectivity to the internet as a basic right, because every other thing is going to depend on meaningful connectivity, not just once in a while, not a drop in the ocean kind of connectivity, broadband, fast, meaningful connectivity, which will in turn allow people to access, use, benefit, contribute, create, and develop themselves. The other norm that I want to say is that once we're able to connect, it is very important that skills follow. AI, it's about data, yes, but it's humans who drive AI, like my co-panelists have said. So we need people to be empowered to be able to create. If you give someone a connected phone and they don't know what to do with it, then there is a problem. So for us to be able to bridge the divide between the North and the South, between the norms creator and the norms consumers, we need that education. We need the right. Those two are really very important. I could say a lot of things, but I want to summarize by saying for it to be for everyone and for it to be for good, we need this to be a right, recognized as a right, so we can invest in it, and we need everyone to be equipped to be co-creators. I don't know if I can add a word here about saying that actually those who are less connected today, those who are less creative in the AI world, are actually the people who need it the most. So is there a way we can reverse this and be saying, like we've said, instead of it being mostly men, mostly middle-aged men, mostly men from the global north, can we reverse? Have women, young women from the global south. I'm sitting in Abidjan today, and I cannot not call for more work to be put into global south young women to come up in the AI world, and of course, as an extension in the tech world, so that it will truly be for everyone and for good. I'll stop so far.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those very, very poignant, calls to everyone at the Paris Peace Forum 2021 on how to, democratize access to the internet and ensuring, you said two specific things, one about connectivity and the next one about skills. And I'm going to come back to those later. But to go to Alice and the points, jumping off the point Nena made about for good and for everyone, what are promising approaches that can counter these legacies of colonialism, racism, sexism, particularly in the context of bias, stereotyping, and discrimination within the digital economy? What should we be thinking of?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Nena, for sharing all that you do. I've known Nena for many years. I think for me the first would be to acknowledge that societies in the global south are organized around, in the global north actually, not global south, are organized around exclusion and domination, and then that is reflected in the way that technology is created. There's the whole of these things and that existence of artificial, legally enforced construct that is defined by racial exclusion, and this will not stay locked in a closet for that long. And then when you look at historical memory of, for example, pre-colonial world, especially of the Africa region, is also actively suppressed in order to maintain what we see as the present-day status quo of racial hierarchy, including the idea that colonizers brought civilization to the world. So whatever realities, for example, that African civilizations or our cultures or histories existed in the pre-colonial world is deemed irrelevant, which, certainly could help, especially in developing, the current tools. As I said earlier, you cannot really come up with technology solutions for a society if you really do not understand that society. And I think this is now where that dilemma appears, because, we might sit here and say, okay, let's try and use the same tools that affluent countries in the global north, broadly speaking, have done. But we know that the strategy that the global north continues to do, and has the approach that they've taken, we know that this strategy requires, for example, protecting one's economy, including these, big tech companies that are, part of that economy, with, for example, trade tariffs and all of that, including public investments, because in fact the internet was created with public investments. And so the only way we see it is, what Nena was talking about, in democratizing these institutions and democratizing, including democratizing the entire global economic governance, so that, countries in the global south that are poor have a fair say in setting up some of the norms. And we must also stop exaggerating the capabilities of AI systems, because then what happens, the more we do that, we are exaggerating it, and we bring it to the global south and claim that it's going to help with health and education and agriculture and all of these systems. The more we do that, the more we divert attention from the real dangers that these new emerging technologies pose, and those are much more invincible and much more nuanced and gradual than anything, and so the problem with this is that AI tools are presented as objective and value-free, and in fact, some automated systems, for example, some automated systems for hiring and policing are put forward with explicit claim that they could, eliminate human bias, but they don't. And in fact, if anything, algorithms are embedded opinions, and so that's the reason why sometimes the embedded code, rather, algorithms are opinions embedded in code, and that's the reason why they replicate a lot of the discrimination, racial biases that we see, and the fact that it's dominated by, an elite, primarily white male workforce, and so, what are some of the solutions? And, I think I would go back to the question that Kenneth Kaunda, the president of Zambia, had asked: is there any way that people can have the blessings of technology without being eaten away by materialism and losing the spiritual dimension from their lives? That was Kenneth Kaunda, long time ago. And and how do we counter the discriminatory effects of technologies that have been created apparently to eradicate inequality, but through participation, in fact, if anything, they disfranchise people even further. And how do we ensure that this we counter this? And I think I'll keep saying we cannot really understand the role of technology can play in a society if we don't understand the society, and we need to be able to actually acknowledge the harms that were created, for example, by colonialism, and how they continue to be embedded into technology, and use the same approaches. We cannot use technology or artificial intelligence, for that matter, to actually counter, for example, the discrimination and racial inequalities and all the other inequalities that exist. We have to first address, the human factor, the human issues that we are dealing with, and for that, I think I would like to, for example, offer what we Africans have known for the longest time. I think, what we call relational ethics in this end, the spirit of Ubuntu, the philosophy of Ubuntu. That's, that communal way of developing technology so that you understand, the society. And in fact, talking about just that, looking at Ubuntu itself and the history of the African, for example, in the global South, the African continent, for that matter, Ubuntu, for example, is if you Google Ubuntu, it comes up up as a Linux operating system that has been around only since 2004. Unsurprising, the original meaning of this word has existed for centuries. And so this appropriation of the word with its rich culture and history to a shallow tech slogan is not, it's not only symptomatic, it's really symptomatic of the global North technologies world's complete inability to decenter non-Western perspectives while stripping them off of all our rich and cultural history. So, we need to ground, for example, the key concepts of ethics and justice and knowledge, bias and fairness, into how we think about emerging technologies. And also we have to stop looking at AI and thinking, oh, AI can solve this problem. So when the challenges are often formulated as problem solution, the consequences of that is that there's some problems and solution formulation that refuse to fit neatly into that technology solution little box. So we need a completely different approach for algorithmic systems to be fair, and for fairness and justice. I think it's applying the same social justice principles that we need so that we can counter the effects that we see that are embedded, that continue to perpetuate race, gender discrimination, and all the other harms that we see. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I could just stop you there, because I'd like to go to Gabriela and talk about some of the things that you've just said about the human context and the fact that, if one set of people feel marginalized, then we're not exactly doing what we should be doing. I'm coming back to you, Gabriela, and your role as ADG. Now, UNESCO has produced this ethical impact assessment for AI. Our working group, incubated by the Paris Peace Forum, has also been working on a digital bill of rights, which will be available to policymakers next year. Now, the question is, how can we ensure that the benefits of this digital economy and new applications of AI, especially in the context of education and human development, are not lost? And I think I'll put a rider to that and say, what are your thoughts and UNESCO's plans on ensuring uptake by member states so we don't just have another set of documents that are not used?
Bueno, I'm starting in Spanish. That was nice. Now, the fact is that this is the ultimate goal of the recommendations on the ethics of artificial intelligence and the ethical impact assessment, to generate the tools, the facts, the analysis, and the best practices. Because this is not new. We want to call these technologies incipient. The reality is that they have been with us for more than 2 decades or 3 decades. And therefore, we really need to develop a framework that is going to enhance the benefits that they produce and control the downsides. That's exactly what we're doing. But I would like to counter, because sometimes the debate about AI is full of concern, full of fears, because we know the kind of dangers and risks that can be associated with badly developed technologies. But the reality is that these technologies are super promising. You see it in the discovery of the vaccine. I mean, without the massive amount of work that the AI technologies had to carry forward to understand the virus, we would have never had a vaccine in 1 year time. Usually it's 4 years, 8 years. Of course, there was a shortening of the trial period, but the reality is that these technologies are allowing for amazing things. They can allow for managing better the food systems worldwide. They allow to have tracking of child trafficking. It's just amazing what they can do in terms of promising in the health sector. I mean, the kind of accuracy that you can have for these technologies when combined with the knowledge of the practitioners and the doctors is just fully. So the question here is not to say how do we ensure that the benefits, because the benefits are there. The benefits are there. What we want to have is more inclusive processes. What we want to have is more inclusive outcomes. because what we see is that these technologies are highly skewed. They are produced, 77% of all the developments are produced by a handful of companies, 200 from the north. 9,000 patents are produced by IBM, and some others are producing by some other very big multinationals. And therefore, the real question here is how do we ensure that we don't leave half of the world behind, which is exactly the part that is not even connected to the iPhones. And therefore, this needs a comprehensive agenda, a holistic approach that will start by looking at the connectivity. But from the perspective of the recommendation, we are establishing very concrete values in terms of inclusiveness, diversity, respect of human rights, rule of law. And I think this is the core of the issue. The kind of gains that we have achieved in the analog world for centuries, I would say, the kind of rights, for example, that workers have in the employment frameworks, the right to have holidays, the right to have compensation, the right to have sick leaves, all these rights need to be translated in the digital world. And this is the role of the governments. So the recommendation is developing a set of course, the narrative that needs to be human-centric, human rights perspective. The ethical also allows you to go even beyond the current human rights framework, because there might be some, like in the neuro rights or the brain rights, that are not yet fully codified. So that's what the ethical process and reflection helps you to do to deliver better outcomes. But at the same time, we're looking at how do we do the things. We're not only saying the what, we're looking at the how. And I think this goes to your question. If we don't have the how, we're gonna deliver on it. If we don't create a movement, and now it's being created because UNESCO members are calling themselves early adopters, no? It's gonna be adopted on Tuesday, but I'm starting to hear countries saying, I'm gonna be an early adopter. What does it mean? That the recommendation will allow countries to measure themselves where they are now and where they need to be or go to deliver for what we are establishing are the goals of the ethical impact assessment and the ethical AI. And therefore, what we need to first and foremost need to ensure that the technologies can be developed by all the world, that we have more women, that we have more diverse teams, that we allow for these technologies to be also developed by the South, that we invest in the capacities of the South. And it's not only to put it in the countries that are developing or low income, is to really generate a movement of solidarity of the countries that are really at the frontier of these technologies, to look back and see that we really need to do this together, and that we need to support those that are lagging behind. But we also need to make sure that we have a common narrative. And this is what we are achieving, and that's why we are so proud of it, because it's the very first global instrument that is adopting, endorsing this human rights perspective, this human dignity perspective, this fairness perspective to deliver. We will be developing not only the ethical impact assessment that we feel will differentiate this global agreement from others, because it's going to be super concrete. We will be testing and looking at how much impact the tool has in the countries that are linked to the recommendation. But we will also be developing the readiness assessment. This is exactly what I mentioned, the capacities of the countries in terms of skills, in terms of ecosystems, in terms of technological environments, in terms of universities, in terms of the governments. We're going to look at what are the best practices in terms of developing these technologies for good, and then try to reproduce them with very concrete advice and references and benchmarks and evidence to deliver for good. We are now hearing, as I said, that there are countries wanting to really pursue the delivery of this tool, and we will be working with them, because there's nothing more powerful than evidence. And if we can prove how much implementing the recommendation, ensuring this diversity, ensuring the control of the risks, ensuring that we have the right regulations. I think that we have been living in a world free regulatory frameworks in many of the main developers of these technologies. And we're still looking at competition internationally, economic competition. And this is what is preventing some of the major developers not to get into more constraints because they are in an international race, an international technological race. But what we're saying is no, we cannot continue like that. And I'm encouraged because in the U.S., who is one of the countries that have been more laissez-faire, no, regulatory, and leave the technologies to grow, they are now looking at the Bill of Rights. The Office of the President of Technology are looking at building up the Bill of Rights. We know that Europe is enhancing their protections, and Europe has been a champion in terms of dealing with this, along with France and Germany. And in the South, we are also seeing how much countries are taking the issues in their hands. But this platform that UNESCO is providing will allow countries to learn from each other and to look how to do things and how to develop regulations and regulatory frameworks that can deliver more investments for ethical AI and control systems and mechanisms to downplay those that are harming our societies. So we are very excited. This is work in progress, but I feel that with this very same spirit that characterized 193 members of UNESCO to come together to agree on this fantastic narrative, we are counting on them to deliver on what this recommendation is called to do for the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gabriela, for that really rounded response, both on your thoughts and what UNESCO is thinking for its 193 member states. I'm going to come to you, Malika, because sometimes, despite the spirit that we want everyone and every nation to have, sometimes we have to lean into structures. It is often said that people function in the presence of structure and in the presence of guidelines. And so because you have done extensive work within technology law, etc., what are some major tensions, and I think I'd posed this question before, what are some major tensions in formulating digital rights frameworks and artificial intelligence standard-setting instruments that are meaningful, impactful, and applicable worldwide? So this is across the global north and south, which I think we should stop using, seen as Nena has challenged that. But where do you see the place of law and legal arbitration? And just, I think I'm trying to say, in the coming together, right? Where do you see tensions, and what is the place of legal instruments in ensuring that we can diffuse these tensions?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think it actually links, Gabriela was talking about how technology is not exogenous. It's also not inevitable, right? It's not something where there is one linear pathway and it's, we're often finding ourselves in situations where technology is the answer without really thinking what was the question. And I think the law has a really, really big role to play here. I think one of the things we've seen recently is an ethical turn, where we've had guidelines, principles, norms, any flavor that you like. In our working group, we identified about 160 guidelines that seek to regulate something like algorithmic governance. And I think these are lovely, they're wonderful, they're great ways to bring people around a table and try and achieve consensus, but none of them have the sanctions and the power that the law does, right? We could agree in a consensual manner on something that's ethical, but when you have human rights law, when you have competition law, you have other kinds of legal instruments, you actually have remedies. Right? They're not just setting norms that have no actual ability to operationalize them or to have sanctions when they're disobeyed. So I think we have to keep coming back to the law as something that will actually deliver actionable outcomes. One of the other things that I wanted to point out was we keep talking about emerging technology as if the people are also emerging, right? We assume that any system that has a lot of people covered with access, a lot of people under the web of algorithmic decision-making, that's part of a project of modernity, that those countries are modern and everyone that's not connected and everybody that isn't algorithmically profiled and sorted is somehow backwards, right? We use this notion of a smart city as if the people preceding a smart city are somehow dumb. right? We talk about smart cities, but stupid people. And I think one of the things I'm really interested in is the extent to which the law can be a real weapon for social change, where you're actually trying to say it's not the tools and the infrastructure on a technological level alone that will make a place inclusive and smart and high-tech and modern, but it's actually the rights that people have and the extent to which they have agency and choice in the decisions that affect them. You know, we talk about inclusion, and the problem is we only mean inclusion into a data set, inclusion into a system that otherwise doesn't notice these people exist. We very rarely talk about inclusion when it comes to outcomes, when it comes to impact, when it comes to voices. It's as if once we've gathered them and hoovered up their data, their utility ceases. And I think that's actually a really, really problematic area where systems have a last mile problem, where if particular demographics, particular marginalized communities are not seen as worthy recipients, they're not seen as profit-making centers, they're not seen as targets worth extending products and services to because the return on investment is very low. I think if you allow the market to drive a lot of investments in this area, you will have these kinds of divides and haves and have-nots. Whereas if you use anti-discrimination law, you use systems within the law that have a history of accounting for racial justice, I think we have a much, much better chance of actually meeting these normative guidelines that we aspire to. We talk about a Bill of Rights, and one of my critiques is that the rights usually involve the weakest in any system, the weakest in any chain, to actually do something towards availing of those rights, towards enforcing them, towards benefiting from them. It's the poorest, weakest person in the link that expected to do the emotional labor and use their own resources towards securing their own rights and freedoms. I think if we actually had a Bill of Wrongs, where we call on governments to remedy the wrongs that they have done, where we call across companies to remedy the wrongs that they have done, I think you could change things at scale, right? When we talk about rights, you're always expecting individuals to do things for themselves, or using class action suits, using public interest litigation, when they're already in survival mode. They're already trying just to get along and live and feed their families and survive. And it is a privilege. Securing rights is a privilege for a lot of the world, which is why I think civil society is so hugely important as an intermediary that tries to secure rights for people who are too poor and without the right capacity and resources to enact their own freedoms. And I think in a world where we have shrinking spaces, shrinking public arenas, where voices are marginalized and diminished, where people are subject to very, very real threats of physical violence, emotional violence, just because they are trying to articulate concerns and claims against systems that diminish them, against systems that seek to perpetuate hierarchies and the status quo. I think that's really problematic. And I think as long as civil society remains vibrant, people's interests will be secured, and the law can be used as a very real instrument to enact benefits for people at scale. And I think the law can force platforms to enact systems at scale. They can make changes to defaults. You can have privacy and human rights by default and by design, rather than something that's a bolt-on after the fact, rather than have it being baked into the system, being baked into the design of a product, the design of a data set. And I think the law has a very real role to play in this. If you make algorithmic impact assessments part of regulation, if you make audits something that's just the most natural, normal thing in the world, I think that will have really huge impact downstream for the people, as Nana said, the people that really need them, more than the people that are creating. And I think as long as we continue to talk in terms of binaries of producer and consumer, or north and south, if we don't recognize our shared humanity and the intersectional nature of our concerns, We wrote a manifesto recently, and it's literally spelled manifesto, MANYFESTO, for people who want to look at it, picking up on what Alice was talking about, Ubuntu philosophy. Several of us came together to look at different systems of ethics and practices and indigenous knowledge systems that were being erased due to systems of oppression. And so if we invite you to look at this little manifesto.ai, which actually articulates ways that you can reorient and use the law and governance rather than using this in an oppositional, othering kind of way where you always define the South in relation to the North. And I think by decentering these systems and looking at the ways in which the law can play a huge role at the local level, at the regional level, we can enact real change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Malavika. And we have about 9 minutes left. So this is your last call for questions, everyone. Thank you for staying with us so far. Alice, there's a question for you that's just coming through the platform. I'm going to ask that you please take, about 90 seconds to answer that question so that I can take other questions for the rest of the panel. And the question is, how can corporate accountability in the area of digital rights be better incorporated in global governance? What tools have the most potential?
Okay, thank you for that question. From a Mozilla perspective, we believe, that industry, civil society and governments really do need to work together to make several things happen. And I think the first is, a shift in industry norms. Many of the people building AI are seeking new ways to be responsible and accountable when developing the products and services that we use every day. And I think we need to encourage more builders to take this approach. The old approach of, move fast and break things no longer applies. And I think we've seen, how the devastating effect it has. And then, best practices will emerge, in key areas of, trustworthy AI, which will probably drive changes to industry norms. And then, truly believe that the people building some of these emerging technologies must be trained to think more critically about their work from a human, perspective, and also, ensuring that we are involving as many diverse stakeholders as possible, and industry themselves, building products that are, have features like stronger privacy, meaningful transparency, and, products that really do put put users back in control of their own online lives. So essentially what I'm saying is that the best thing for, the corporate sector and the private sector and, those working in this field or developing this technology is that we need to build new trustworthy AI tools and technologies that would create new business models and new incentives with transparency in mind, with solutions that really center, personhood, they center, data privacy, they center justice, and also must place ethics as something that goes above and beyond technical solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that from this panel, we're taking away a few things. We've been adding just very gradually to the things we're taking away. So there's the urgency of quality connectivity. There's the urgency of skills. There's the bill of wrongs, so that people who are already vulnerable by way of technological injustices do not have to further extend themselves to get reprieve. I have another question. Which says, and I think I'm just going to throw it open and any of you on the panel can take this. And then I have a final question for you, but I'm going to throw this one open to anyone on the panel, which is, how can AI be used to, one, help world leaders practice best practices and work to end violence against women and children, so, abuse, but also to implement transparent actions that will end poverty of knowledge and the poverty of resources? Is this UNESCO? Gabriela, you want to go for this one?
Well, the whole question here is, how do you incentivize producers of these technologies to develop solutions for something like gender-based violence? I think that's the proof of the pie, I would say. because for UNESCO, one thing is to ensure that the legal, regulatory, and technological frameworks that we have are informed by this ethical reflection and by the human rights law. And that's, would say, these are the minimum, no? The minimum is that we have a human rights law and we need to respect it. The other thing is, how do we build the incentives for the technologies to be used to address these other challenges? And they are very promising, because these technologies can really help you understand the dynamics of complex societal problems. Of course, it requires massive data gathering. It requires very honed skills in data training and looking at developing the algorithms. But the reality is that this is exactly what we want to do. And we have a chapter on gender, and I feel that a very simple way of doing this and having more investments for delivering for better futures for women is to have more women developing the technologies. And this is exactly what happened with this distinction of the North and the South. If the technology is being developed only by a certain group of countries with certain profiles, with certain level of income, definitely they are going to be looking at using these technologies for addressing their own challenges. And that's why you see more of this technology being used to track fires, forest fires that are so recurrent in like in Argentina, in Australia or the US, while you spend less in problems with harvest that is more linked to Africa. And therefore, this is the real question. But for me, it's the diversity of the teams, the diversity of the producers, and then the mindset of the producers. How do the world leaders get this? Well, I feel they all need to be better informed, but they also need to prioritize the well-being of people. And this is a call to leaders that UNESCO does. Is not about geopolitical competition, is not about gaining a share in the market, is not about maximizing profits. We know that this kind of philosophy has not taken us very far, and we need to change. We need to change the development model, and we need to put people at the center. And this is a kind of call that the UNESCO's recommendation is doing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We have about 2 minutes left. Lena, my final question comes to you, which came from the audience, and it says, how can we ensure that everyone has the right not only to connectivity, but also to digital literacy and is able to challenge unfair uses of AI systems?
Thank you very much. I'm mindful of our time. I wanted to share one clean, good practice, which we started at the Web Foundation. First of all, 2 years ago, the inventor of the World Wide Web called for a contract for the web. And today, the UN Secretary General is calling for a global digital compact. So I think the time is right for humanity to begin global digital cooperation. So this is really my first submission. My second submission is that following the contract for the web, we started the Tech Policy Design Lab. We took on exactly that point that Gabriela mentioned, online gender-based violence, and working 14 months with women and men from all over the world at Generation Equality. We got TikTok, Facebook, Google, and Twitter to commit to make online gender-based violence on women more manageable. Now, where AI can come in is where we can use AI to track these commitments. So tracking commitment is very important. Today, we are at Paris Peace Forum, right? Everyone is going to say something. Everyone is going to sound wonderful. Everyone is going to sound cooperative. And after that, they walk away. Who follows it? Who monitors it? Who reports on it? That is one of the things we need to do. And for the person who asked me, how can we ensure that everyone gets access to connectivity? Like I said before, we need to make it a right so that when people come to Human Rights Council in Geneva, when they begin to submit their human rights report, we begin to ask them about internet shutdowns. I am a Nigerian, and Choma, I think you're in Nigeria, where Twitter is shut down, but President Buhari is in Paris. We need to begin to call people out on the bill of wrongs, as we have said. It is time for responsibility. The contract for the web says governments are responsible, platforms, as we said, we work with them, are responsible, and I, Nena, as an individual, I am responsible. So if the internet, if digital technology has brought us this far, if digital technology has helped us as humanity to face the pandemic, imagine where we would have been if there was no internet connectivity and the pandemic came. So if digital technology has allowed us to remain as humanity, it is time we all became responsible. We cannot just come to Paris, make great announcements, and walk away. AI should help us track these announcements, track their accountability, report on them, and call people up on their bill of wrongs. Finally, my dear, I cannot not speak here and not say that young women, Africa, people from developing countries need internet the more. And we need it today, not tomorrow. And I want to end again by that line that everybody knows. All humans are born digitally free, equal in rights and in dignity. My name is Nena, and I hope to see everyone online.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'd like to say a big thank you to my panel for the care and the conscientiousness with which they approach this conversation. And I just want to thank you very much for the work that you do. I'm thanking Gabriela Ramos, the Assistant Director General at UNESCO. I'd like also to thank Alice Munya, Director Africa Mradi at Mozilla Corporation, Malavika Jaharam, Executive Director at the Digital Asia Hub, Nena Wakama, Chief Web Advocate, World Wide Web Foundation, and to Jack Loveridge, Bo Kanle, and the technical team, including Paul and Leah, for ensuring we had a smooth conversation. My name is Choma Webo. Thank you so much for joining us today.